Subcommittee on Economic Development, Public Buildings, and Emergency Management will come to order. Chair asks unanimous consent that the chairman be authorized to declare recess at any time during today's hearing without objection, so ordered. Chair also asks unanimous consent that members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions without objection, so ordered. As a reminder, if members wish to insert a document into the record, please also email it to documentsti@mail.house.gov. The chair now recognizes himself for the purposes of an opening statement for 5 minutes. Before I begin, I first want to thank the dedicated personnel of the Federal Protective Service who work to protect federal workers and visitors to federal facilities across our great country. Over the years, there have been FPS law enforcement and contract guards who have made the ultimate sacrifice to protect workers and visitors in federal buildings. Since 2019, there have been nearly 1,000 assaults at federal facilities and nearly 7,000 arrests. Because of this, it is critically important that the FPS law enforcement officers and the thousands of contract guard known as Protective Service Officers, or PSOs, have what they need to do and complete their job. Given the importance of this issue, the committee requested that GAO review building security and more specifically conduct covert tests similar to the work done by GAO in 2009. Today's hearing will examine the findings of GAO's work and the current state of FPS protection of our nation's federal buildings. FPS officers, along with more than 14,000 PSOs, are responsible for the protection of and the security at approximately 9,000 facilities, the majority of which are owned or managed by GSA. FPS law enforcement officers manage the PSOs, ensure they are properly trained, are at their post, and respond when needed to any incident. However, there have been ongoing challenges that impact the ability of FPS law enforcement to do their jobs. Recently, there have been increasing rates of crime, drug use, and homelessness across the country that are impacting the safety of those who work and visit federal facilities. For example, the United States Department of Health and Human Services office in San Francisco advised some federal employees to work from home in light of conditions at the federal building. Earlier this year, Representative Shahzev Darimer, Ezel, and I sent letters to the director of FPS and the GSA administrator to assess how the increasing levels of crime, drug abuse, and homelessness have impacted the protection of federal buildings and the safety of those that work and visit them. The letter also raised concerns regarding how increasing crime rates may be leading to more empty and unused federal building space. This is all happening while FPS is understaffed, with 259 law enforcement positions currently left unfilled. Additionally, in its recent work, GAO revealed that while there has been some improvement since building security testing in 2009, the success rate in identifying prohibited items on average is only 50%. I think we can do better. Compounding these challenges, the tools FPS needs to effectively manage the PSOs don't work. As GAO found in their latest report, the new data systems used by FPS law enforcement to oversee their contract guards or PSOs have significant flaws. Despite spending nearly $30 million of taxpayer funds on new electronic systems, FPS struggles to know if a guard is at their post or not, or if that guard even has the qualifications needed to detect dangerous weapons. This lack of reliable data tracking has raised concerns with customer agencies like the Internal Revenue Service and the Social Security Administration, and further, this lack of reliability has impacted the accessibility of services to the taxpayer. The idea that the IRS had to close 30 of their taxpayer assistance centers and the SSA closed over 500 locations for full days because a contract guard failed to report to their post is absolutely, completely unacceptable. The GAO has issued report after report for years now on many of these issues, yet FPS has not yet resolved them. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today on these issues and thank them for being here. The chair now recognizes the ranking member, Ms. Titus, for 5 minutes for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for calling this important hearing. Thank you to our witnesses. Some are very familiar. They've been here before, and they always provide us with excellent information in a very professional way. You know, it's very important to talk about the Federal Protective Service and all that they do to keep us safe in our federal buildings, especially important in my district in Las Vegas, where we had the shooting at the Lord George Federal Courthouse. It was a number of years ago, but a security guard was killed there, and we never forget that. As the chairman said, y'all are tasked with protecting more than 9,000 owned and leased facilities and responsible for keeping those workplaces safe for people who work there, people who are contractors, people who come and visit or who conduct business with those government agencies. So ensuring that you have the resources you need to keep people and property safe and secure while you're facing a wider range and growing number of threats is really critical to keeping our government functioning and serving the public. In recent history, we've seen dangerous situations and threats posed to our federal buildings. These have included plane crashes, car bombings, active shooters, you name it, it's practically happened there in a federal building, and you need to be prepared to address any of these situations and more. Currently, DHS's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, I guess, heads the Interagency Security Committee, which sets those standards that need to be met by our federal facilities. And based on these standards, then the FPS can identify risk and recommend actions to mitigate those risks, including additional resources you might need, such as screening equipment and security cameras. Among my many concerns is that even though the FPS has sent thousands of these assessments to federal agencies, many of their recommendations have just been ignored, and it's apparent that there are a number of vulnerabilities that could have been but need to be addressed. In reading the testimony of Mr. Maroney, I found it shocking to know that when the GAO conducted covert tests to test some of these vulnerabilities, FSP contract guards were unable to detect weapons ranging from batons to multi-purpose tools with knives in half of the test. And what's more concerning is that when the FPS conducted its own covert testing, this time with firearms and components for making explosive devices, the detection rate was almost the same. So, you know, this is just unacceptable and not good for anybody involved. I appreciate very much the work of the FPS and its contractors and the potential harms that they face every day because they are on the front line, but these exposures have to be addressed, and that's why I'm interested in hearing from you all just what the extent of the problem is, how we can address it, what resources you might need, and what changes in policy we should perhaps put forward. So thank you for joining us, and I look forward to the hearing.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Larson, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Subcommittee Chair Perry and Subcommittee Ranking Member Titus for calling today's hearing on federal buildings. I want to thank our witnesses today. Commissioner and Director, appreciate you once again making time to discuss federal facility issues with the subcommittee, and Commissioner Klein, I recognize you have very heavy demands on your time and attention, so I appreciate your participation as well. Prior to the '95 bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah building in Oklahoma City, the federal government had no established approach to security for federally owned or leased facilities. Immediately following the bombing, President Clinton directed the DOJ to assess the vulnerability of federal facilities to terrorist attacks and to develop recommendations for minimum security standards. Despite agency-wide coordination and the establishment of the Interagency Security process, the ISC process, federal facility security has remained on the Government Accountability Office's high-risk list for the past 21 years. In 2022, a GAO study found that from 2017 through 2021, FPS made more than 25,000 security recommendations at nearly 5,000 federal facilities. So while facility security committees approved 27% of those recommended countermeasures, most of those countermeasures were not implemented. The FPS has other significant challenges. Hiring and retaining law enforcement staff has been difficult. IT systems developed specifically to track and to verify guard training and certifications are not reliable. Entry access points are not always staffed, and GAO's covert testing program has found that contract guards did not consistently detect prohibited items when screening bags. Also of concern is a heightened risk of political protests at federal facilities around the country and the use of drones near federal facilities and high-profile public events. So this hearing is an important time. This hearing is taking place at a particularly important time of political and social unease. And I hope today's witnesses will share their ideas for improving the security of federal buildings and the safety of the employees who work there. And with that, I want to thank the chair and yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. I now welcome our witnesses and thank them for taking the time to be here today. Some of you more familiar than others, but I'm still going to go through the process of explaining our lighting system to our witnesses, maybe for the benefit of everybody else here. There are 3 lights in front of you. Green means go, yellow means you're running out of time, and red means please conclude your remarks. Chair asks unanimous consent that the witnesses' full statements be included in the record without objection, so ordered. Chair also asks unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. Without objection, so ordered. Chair also asks unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. As your written testimony has been made part of the record, the subcommittee asks that you limit your oral remarks to 5 minutes. With that, Mr. Maroney, you're recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Perry, Ranking Member Titus, and members of the subcommittee. I'm pleased to be here today to discuss FPS's efforts to secure about 9,000 federal facilities and oversee the more than 13,000 contract guards who protect those buildings and their occupants nationwide. The security of federal facilities has been a long-standing area of concern. Our work has highlighted several persistent challenges over the years. In particular, we've identified weaknesses in how contract guards detect and prevent prohibited items from entering federal buildings. We've also identified significant and ongoing problems with the data systems FPS uses to oversee its security program. These challenges are a key reason that federal real property management remains on GAO's high-risk list after more than 20 years. Continuing threats to federal facilities make it absolutely critical for FPS to successfully resolve these issues. Doing so will best ensure that the men and women who protect these buildings have the training and tools they need to carry out their mission. At this committee's request, we have been reviewing how FPS is doing in addressing some of these persistent challenges. We focused on 2 areas. First, how effective contract guards are at detecting prohibited items, and whether FPS data systems have improved agency oversight of its contract guard program. While our final report will not come out until the fall, the bottom line is clear. FPS continues to face significant challenges on both fronts. In terms of detecting prohibited items, our investigators conducted 27 covert tests at 14 federal buildings earlier this year. During those tests, they attempted to bring bags into the buildings with prohibited items like pepper spray, batons, and a multi-purpose tool with a knife. The FPS contract guards detected those prohibited items about half of the time. However, the other half of the time, the items got through. While we only did a small number of tests, our results are consistent with the results of FPS's own more extensive covert testing program. These results are cause for concern. To FPS's credit, they have several reform efforts underway that aim to improve the detection of prohibited items. For example, FPS is redesigning the initial training course for contract guards, and it is also working to identify common causes of covert test failures to better target potential remedies. These are positive steps. However, continued attention and sustained action in this area will be important. As for the data systems FPS uses to oversee its contract guard program, we found significant problems that continue what has been a very long-standing challenge for the agency. For example, FPS's post-tracking system, which is meant to be the system of record for ensuring that every post is staffed by a qualified guard, was initially piloted in 2018. However, after 6 years, it is yet to be fully implemented in any region. As a result, FPS still requires contractors to use an old paper-based system for billing and guard verification, which creates double work. Moreover, the system continues to have significant technology, data reliability, and interoperability problems, and has not delivered on its promised capabilities. The stubborn and ongoing problems with this and other FPS data systems undermine the agency's productivity and its oversight of contract guards. In conclusion, the security of federal facilities remains a high-risk area. FPS and the contract guards it oversees play an essential role in ensuring the safety of those who work in and visit federal buildings. If the persistent challenges I've described today are to be resolved, FPS will need to pay sustained attention to these issues and take deliberate action. By doing so, the agency will be able to best ensure the security of FPS-protected facilities going forward. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my opening statement. I'll be happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Maroney. Mr. Klein, you are now recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony, sir.
Good morning, Chairman Perry, Ranking Member Titus, and distinguished members of this subcommittee. My name is Chris Klein, and I have the privilege of serving as the Director of the Federal Protective Service, or FPS. I have served my country for the last 42 years in the Army and as a career civil servant, and I am honored to be here today to represent the outstanding men and women of our agency and to discuss the critical mission of FPS as well as the state of federal facility security. I am pleased to be sitting alongside our partners from GSA, with whom we have an excellent and long-standing partnership, and the GAO, who provides impartial and independent reviews and recommendations for improving the operations of the agency. FPS is a federal law enforcement agency of 1,642 federal employees, including 1,140 federal law enforcement officers and approximately 14,000 contract protective security officers, or PSOs. FPS protects approximately 8,500 federal facilities located in every state and territory. We protect the federal government's infrastructure, employees, contractors, and members of the public seeking government services from incidents ranging from terrorist attacks to prohibited items in federal facilities. Our most visible countermeasure is our contract PSOs, who are the front line of security at our federal facilities. Our PSOs stand posted at thousands of federal facilities across the nation and are in daily contact with federal employees and visitors. They conduct a variety of security functions, such as visitor screening operations, roving patrols, and control center operations. FPS personnel conduct oversight inspections, on-the-job training, covert security tests, and administrative audits of the PSOs. Our contract PSOs work diligently to prevent dangerous items from entering federal facilities. Every year, PSOs detect and prevent hundreds of thousands of prohibited items from entering federal facilities. In the last year, more than 2,000 firearms were prevented from entering federal facilities. Our dedicated federal law enforcement officers and PSOs put their lives at risk every day to accomplish our mission. Over the last several years, our PSOs have been instrumental in stopping attacks at federal facilities, placing themselves between an attacker and those we protect. Our law enforcement officers and PSOs have been shot, stabbed, physically assaulted while performing their duties. Just 2 weeks ago, one of our PSOs was injured when an individual intentionally drove into him at a federal facility in South Florida. I spoke with his PSO last week, and I'm happy to report that he is recovering from his injuries. Since our inception in 1971, FPS has lost 7 law enforcement officers in the line of duty. And since 2015, 3 PSOs have sacrificed their lives protecting federal employees. Over the past few years, we have seen a significant increase in crimes at federal facilities, and more importantly, threats to federal civil servants. Last year, we noted a 29% increase in disorderly conduct incidents, an 84% increase in violations of federal facility rules and regulations, and a 24% increase in assaults on government employees. During this dynamic threat environment, we have increased our vigilance and coordination with federal, state, and local law enforcement partners and stakeholders, and are prepared to respond quickly should a threat be identified. We're also working closely with GSA as co-leads of the Government Services and Facilities Sector, established under National Security Memorandum 22, which was issued in April of 2024. We firmly believe that our partnership under the Government Services and Facilities Sector will enhance the sector's security posture and resilience through enhanced collaboration and information exchange. During today's hearing, you're going to hear about additional improvements needed in the oversight and management of our PSO program. I am taking deliberate corrective actions to address GAO's findings in addition to our routine program management improvement activities. However, make no mistake, it is our top priority to keep federal facilities and employees safe. And every FPS employee and PSO is dedicated to public safety and security and will continue to stand ready to protect our homeland. I would like to thank this subcommittee for your interest in the security of federal facilities and allowing me the opportunity to testify on this critical role that the Federal Protective Service performs every day to ensure our nation's overall security. FPS is and will continue to make a difference, providing a safe and secure work environment at our protected facilities across the nation. I look forward to addressing any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Klein. Mr. Dooms, as you know, you are now recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony. You should almost get a time card in this place, I think.
Good morning, Chairman Perry,
sir.
Ranking Member Titus, Ranking Member Larson, and other members of the subcommittee. My name is Elliot Dooms, and I am the Commissioner of GSA's Public Building Service. Thank you for inviting me to appear before you today to discuss safety and security in federal facilities. My testimony today will highlight some of GSA's roles and responsibilities in keeping federal facilities secure. Executive Order 12977 established the Interagency Security Committee following the bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City in 1995. The ISC was established to improve government-wide coordination of security initiatives and to address the need for increased security and protection, particularly in buildings housing federal employees. The ISC also created standards for security measures at federal facilities. Recognizing that we must balance protections for our federal employees and contractors while keeping buildings accessible to the public, GSA has been an active participant in the development of these security standards, working with the Interagency Security Committee and other federal partners. GSA's Office of Mission Assurance was established to integrate security, continuity, and readiness expertise within the agency and with critical stakeholders. In addition to OMA, the Public Building Service is continuously working with customer agencies to identify the best space to meet their mission needs, including physical security. GSA's physical security responsibilities include working with our security partners and tenant agencies to reduce the risk in GSA facilities. To provide these services, GSA works with tenant agencies in the planning stage of projects to ensure that its space has the proper security requirements to meet its mission's needs. The ISC risk management process requires individual agencies or the Facility Security Committee in multi-tenant facilities to select the appropriate security countermeasures to achieve the highest level of protection as determined by the Facility Security Assessment. Although tenant agencies can select optimal countermeasures for their facilities, FPS and GSA are responsible for ensuring security countermeasures equipment conforms with ISC standards, as well as repairing and replacing security countermeasures. GSA has a long-standing partnership with FPS, which provides law enforcement and related security services for federal buildings in all aspects of security. The Administrative Office of the United States Courts and United States Marshal Service also serve as partners to deliver security services to the federal judiciary and courthouses. To codify these partnerships, GSA currently has memorandums of agreement with FPS, the Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts, and the United States Marshal Service, outlining roles and responsibilities for security at GSA-controlled facilities as applicable. FSCs are another way that GSA remains engaged in the decision-making process with FPS and tenant agencies to review building security. Facility security committees composed of and governed by the tenants and multi-tenant facilities hold the responsibility of addressing facility-specific security issues, including improving the implementation of security countermeasures recommended by FPS. When FPS completes an assessment and recommends security countermeasures for implementation, those recommendations go to the FSC for funding approval and implementation. If a FSC does not approve the funding, those countermeasures go unimplemented. The agencies in that individual building accept the security risk. GSA and FPS do consider certain minimum security standards for every federal facility, and those can evolve over time. For instance, GSA recently collaborated with FPS, the ISC, and the Office of Management and Budget to implement an April 2024 GSA order making security camera and alarm systems part of the baseline minimum security standards for GSA federally owned facilities. GSA has also been working to enhance security at courthouses around the country in light of recent incidents. GSA is working in concert with the Administrative Office of U.S. Courts to modernize courthouse infrastructure, including building hardening, such as replacing or adding break-resistant glass. And to date, GSA has received $15 million in fiscal year 2022 and $12.5 million in fiscal year 2023 for the Judicial Capital Security Fund to complete these projects. There are currently 67 courthouses undergoing this program, with 36 projects in the design stage and ready for construction. GSA is also using landscape architecture to serve as perimeter security measures to discourage potential crime on or around our federal facilities. Landscape architecture can provide natural barriers at federal sites that prevent hiding places and restrict unwanted pedestrian access to building facades. This can be accomplished through the use of dense plantings, walls, fencing, topography, or other means. These features eliminate the need for separate standalone security elements, saving money and making the areas around the facilities more aesthetically pleasing and inviting to visitors. To conclude, ensuring the safety of building occupants is paramount at GSA, and we take such matters seriously at all times. With congressional support of the fiscal year 2025 budget requests and legislative proposals, GSA will be one step closer to modernizing our federal footprint, which will advance key security priorities in our facilities. Through continued partnership with agencies like the FPS, GSA will continue providing to ensure security at every federal facility across the country. Thank you for your time today, and I look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Well, thank all of you for your testimony, and we would normally turn to questions right now, but as you can see, we're being informed that there will be a series of votes occurring on the floor starting now. So at this time, the committee will stand in recess subject to the call of the chair. We'll see you in a little while when we get done. We'll start this whole program again here with questions.
This is the
The Subcommittee on Economic Development, Public Buildings, and Emergency Management will reconvene the previously recessed hearing. Sorry for the delay. The chair now yields himself 5 minutes for questioning. Director Klein, the FPS has spent $30 million on tracking and management systems. I mean, it blows my mind. I feel like probably just buy some off-the-shelf management system. It can't be the only one that's trying to track your employees. But the cost is probably actually more than that. But can you give us a date when these systems will be fully up and running so that your law enforcement officers can do their jobs better at managing PSOs? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Perry. So the post-tracking system began development back in 2018, 2017 timeframe, and it was designed to allow the PSOs to utilize their PIV card, their personal identification verification card, to log in and enter a PIN number, and at the time we also asked for a thumbprint for 100% three-factor authentication. We've allowed that to incrementally grow more than it needed to. We need to get back to the basics of the intention of the post-tracking system. We want it to tie to our ISMIS, our suitability program, to make sure the guards are fully certified, their background investigation is up to date, and also TAMS, our Training Academy Management System. TAMS was designed for law enforcement. We're adding PSO records to that, and now we're blending the two together. So I have recently assigned a senior advisor to take responsibility for this program. We've also directed the assignment of acquisition people, because this is an IT-based system, acquisition people to embed with the post-tracking system team to continue the development of it. And we are prepared to initiate a Tiger team to review the entire aspects of the post-tracking system as soon as the GAO report is finalized. But we've already started to get this corrected, sir. Putting the right people in the right box to fix this. It's not a hard thing to fix, but it takes the people with the right responsibilities and the right.
So is there a particular region, and is there a time frame where we can see some successful, you know, I get the mission creep, I get you want to use it for a lot of things, like do one thing right and then figure out the rest from there, but you got to do one thing right.
Absolutely, sir. The post-tracking system is being deployed by region. So we have 11 regions. On one contract, we're 98% deployed. Other contracts, we're 0% deployed. And there's a variety of reasons, sir. It's no excuse, but there's connectivity issues. But this is a cellular-based tablet that they're using to sign in. Connectivity issues, there's firewall issues.
So what do you project is the first region and when they're going to be able to utilize it effectively?
So PSOs are using it now, but it's not being fully implemented on any of our GAR contracts. To give you a date, sir, I need to dive back into this. To give you an exact date, I would have to get back to you with
Well, you know, as a guy who served in uniform, the troops pay attention to what the commander's looking at.
Right.
So you tell me what you're looking at, give me a date, so you got a suspense date so we can all get there. We can know what the expectation is and know when you're going to get there. Director, the Law Enforcement Authority of FPS is Section 1315 of Title 40, United States Code. The authority is vested in the DHS Secretary, who can and has delegated the authority outside of the FPS in the past. There have been reports, and this is what I'm trying to verify, that Homeland Security Investigations, or HSI, was involved in security for former President Trump's rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. Is FPS's law enforcement authority delegated to HSI?
No, sir.
Okay. So that's just a blanket answer. It's not delegated, so we don't need to care who oversees it because it's not being delegated.
Right, exactly, sir. We have not delegated this authority to anyone in DHS right now.
Do you know if it has been, can you provide a list of the delegations in the past of FPS authority?
Yes, sir. So just off the top of my head, sir, so during the summer of 2020, we coordinated with the department to receive additional assistance from ICE, primarily ERO, the Border Patrol, primarily their tactical teams, the federal air marshals, just to assist us in the protection of federal facilities during the summer of 2020. Those delegations, we monitor those. We train the officers and agents on that delegation and what they can and can't do based on that authority. But there's a time that goes along with that, and all those have ended a year ago.
Okay, if you could, please, in the remaining time that I have, if you could, at some point here, next 60 days or something, put a list together of when that delegation happened, when it started, who it was with, and when it ended. We want to make sure that we have a full view of how that's been used in the past, who's used it for what duration, and so on and so forth. You obviously understand that unresolved rumors was something so consequential as what happened in Butler are not good for the country, your agency, or the general public's viewpoint of things. So we'd like to make sure that that's cleared up. And with that, the chair now recognizes the ranking member, Ms. Titus from Nevada.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Klein, after the assassination attempt on the former president, there was a lot of talk about drones and the Secret Service not using the drones, but the shooter did use the drones. FPS has counter-UAS authorities thanks to an extension in the recent FAA bill. I wonder if you can tell us how you all use drones, and if the fact that this runs out pretty soon in October, will that make a difference in how you're able to, or what you'd like to do with the use of drones?
Absolutely, ma'am. Our counter-drone program is essential for the safety and security of our federal facilities. This is 6 U.S.C. 124N, the Preventing Emerging Threats Act of 2018, and you're correct, ma'am, it does expire 1 October. We request that that be extended or made into full legislation. We utilize that. We have a mobile system that we utilize when we work with the Marshal Service to protect a high-risk trial that's going on at a courthouse. The most recent one was in Brunswick, Georgia, for the Ahmaud Arbery civil rights trial that was held there. We put up our system. We mitigated 7 drones that were there. Most of them were from news media, trying to get a close-up of the family, but we were able to mitigate those. The mobile kit is very valuable for us. We can move that to courthouse or use it wherever we need it. We do have counter-UAS permanently implemented at a covered asset here in D.C., 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we have 8 personnel that man that system.
Well, good, thank you. Then we need to do what we can to extend that authority, right, come October?
I'm sorry, ma'am.
I said then we need to do what we can to extend that authority.
Absolutely, ma'am.
All right, thank you. Another question I have is that in May of 2023, Department of Homeland Security issued a National Advisory System Bulletin, and it warned, and this is quotes, "The United States remains in a heightened threat environment. In the coming months, factors that could mobilize individuals to commit violence include their perceptions of the 2024 general election cycle and legislative or judicial issues." Now, that bulletin expired in November 2023. Do you know why it wasn't extended, and should it be extended? And if it was in place, how would that make a difference with the way you operate?
Thank you, ma'am. So the NTAS did expire September 2023. November 2023. In September of 2023, the 2023 Homeland Threat Assessment was put out. And I believe with that Homeland Threat Assessment covered a wider variety and audience than the NTAS did, and I believe that's why the NTAS was expired, to allow the new Homeland Threat Assessment to replace it.
So you think that covers it adequately? We're not facing some problem with the upcoming election because it's sitting in place?
I think we're in a very dynamic threat environment right now, ma'am. As you saw last Saturday, it continues throughout the country, different issues, different grievances that people have for one reason or another. I think, for FPS, we're operating under this environment and prepared to respond as necessary. But I think that the reason it was allowed to expire is because the Homeland Threat Assessment took it over.
Okay, well, thank you. Mr. Maroney, when you talked about some of your studies of weapons that got through and some of the way the guards on the scene missed some of this, I don't want to criticize the people who are there, but did you look at turnover, and did you look at the notion of if benefits were better for some of these guards, morale might be better, and you wouldn't have turnover, and you might have better results in the long run?
So we didn't look at that. We didn't look at the causes behind the failures to detect that half of the items we tried to get through. That is an important piece of the analysis. FPS does have a more extensive covert testing program where they try and get at the causes for testing failures. And that's important. You need that data and to look at what are the root causes of why we're having this failure rate so they can remediate it.
And does that have to do with turnover or not adequate benefits for the people who are there? Mr. Klein,
I don't
you
know.
want to talk to that?
So, ma'am, the contract guard program, 14,000 federal facilities across the country. Right now, at this minute, there's 6,250 guard posts that are open. A guard is standing at that post. If a vendor gets a new contract and they are now paying $1 more per hour, then our PSOs will leave to go. I mean, it's a constant churn to keep them in one place. We renew contracts. They're 5-year contracts. They're renewed every year based on their performance that we've indicated in their contract performance appraisal rating system, CPARs. Whether they're going to be renewed or not is something that we work through. But it is a competitive, very competitive market. It's just like the market for hiring law enforcement. We are all fighting for the same person between all of our agencies. And it's very similar with the PSO program because a guard company will have a new contract and they're going to start doing what they can to pull, especially if they meet all the training requirements. There's number of requirements they have to meet for us. If they meet those requirements and this person gets a new contract, they're going to do what they can to hire them over. They don't have to train them.
Salary, benefits, retirement.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Gentlelady yields. The chairman recognizes the gentlelady from Utah, Ms. Malloy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been sitting here listening, thinking how Americans expect to be safe in federal buildings, and that's what you're tasked with. But we've got some holes here that need to be addressed. We've got some problems that need to be addressed. And to that end, I'm going to yield the remainder of my time to Chairman Perry so he can follow up on the rest of the questions that he has.
Thank you, Representative Malloy. Mr. Maroney, in your testimony, you highlighted incidents where contract guards failed to be at their post, and as a result, both the IRS and the Social Security Administration had to close offices that serve the public. I know that both of those are critical in the district that I'm honored to represent, and I hear regularly claims from constituents, my bosses, about their anger and their irritation about not being able to get their problems resolved for one reason or another. Nobody's at work or they can't get a recurring phone call or whatever, and this is part and parcel to that. Can you detail whether FPS was immediately aware of when a guard was not at his or her post, and can you further describe exactly what happened in these incidents?
So they were not in these situations, not instantly aware, not in real time. And that was part of the issue, is that the tenants, SSA, IRS didn't know what was going on. FPS didn't have that information in real time either, which is a problem because then you can't mitigate. You can't come up with a solution quickly. In theory, PTS, the system we've talked about previously, was supposed to provide the capability remotely for FPS to see if these posts are being staffed. And that would be an important capability because then you could say, okay, this post isn't there. Let's reach out to the vendor. Let's tell IRS and SSA. Let's figure out, are there mitigations we can do?
And then, Director Klein, look, it's hard to fix a problem that you don't know exists, right? You're wherever you are, like you said, there are thousands of buildings across the country, whether it's in the district I represent or somebody else's. If you don't know it's happening, you can't address it. But at the same time, it has to be addressed. And so I'm wondering, what are the steps taken to eliminate the problem? And surely everybody must have known when you set the system up that sooner or later this eventuality is possible, right? And you've got to have like a backup. That's obvious. So where do we stand?
Yes, sir. So typically, right now, so the post tracking system is designed to notify us when someone's not on post. We're not there yet. So the system we put in place, you mentioned the Social Security Customer Service Centers and the IRS Tax Assistance Centers. They won't open unless one of our PSOs is there because they want to make sure there's security there. And if the office manager goes to the office and is waiting on the PSO to show up and they don't, they will contact us and say, your PSO isn't here. We immediately coordinate with the vendor, what's going on, where's your backup, where's your other person. At the same time, now we are dispatching our law enforcement officers to respond to that location, either work to open the facility with the law enforcement officer there while we get a PSO on post, or get the PSO there immediately. It's not the final solution, but it's what we put in place now until we
Yeah,
get.
obviously you need to fix in the meantime. Commissioner Dooms, was GSA aware of these occurrences, these failings, if so called? And if so, is GSA engaged with FPS to ensure that the use of GSA facilities going forward is not impacted by the lack of security? Have you been involved in the process?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. We do have a memorandum of agreement with the Federal Protective Service and an ongoing relationship where we share information with them about who's in the building, who our leasing facility manager is, as well as they're sharing information with us about incident reports. When there's an incident in a building, the PSOs are often the first responders, and they are working with the Facility Security Committee and the tenant agencies to understand what the threat is and whether there's been an incident and whether there need to be additional countermeasures. So our Office of Mission Assurance is working on a consistent and regular basis with the Federal Protective Service.
All right, well, we've got to solve this problem, right? These offices can't go they can't remain closed for lack of security, and so we'll probably look for kind of a review maybe after 6 months to see how that's working as we wait on other things, the other system to come online more fully. Director Klein, an average 50% success rate in the covert testing is not really success by anybody's measure. The FBI director continues to sound the alarm. I'm sure you know that terror threats are at an all-time high. Crime and drug abuse is out of control in many places. FPS law enforcement officers and contract guards are the first line of defense at these federal facilities. And unfortunately, as you know, some have lost their lives. I can't imagine, the numerous altercations on a probably regular basis. Can you talk just briefly about training, upgraded training, and then detecting threats and what they're advised to do when these things happen?
Thank you, sir. So first, we can talk about threats and how they go about detecting those. They have all the guard contractors are required to have radio communications to communicate to our dispatch centers. So when an incident occurs, or there's a threat, or there's a suspicious vehicle, whatever it may be, they immediately notify our dispatch center, and an officer is dispatched to that location. In some instances, it may be a city, county, state officer based on where our local police officer is staffed, but they have a process to use to report that type of activity. So like you mentioned, the PSOs are the first line of defense. They are the ones who are getting shot, getting ran over, getting stabbed on a daily basis. Their training, let's focus on their National Weapons Detection Training Program, how they detect prohibited items in screening. Right now, it's a 16-hour training program that teaches them how to detect items in X-ray machine, and there's an 8-hour training program for the magnetometer. We have our Training and Professional Development Directorate working with academia to enhance that training and make sure that we're teaching adults how to properly detect that equipment. Our equipment is not much different than TSA's equipment. We are going to have our folks go to the TSA Academy and find out how they do their training. Is it something that we might be able to leverage or at least get lessons learned from how they do it? We know we need to increase our ability to detect prohibited items. Big priority for us right now is to get this fixed. I mentioned before, they are detecting 400,000 prohibited items a year. But as was pointed out by the GAO, we're missing items that that are prohibited, that they should pick up. We are actively working to enhance our training program and then to get them through the training to make things better for the screening.
Ms. Malloy's time has long since expired. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Larson from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Klein, the IG recommended after the 2020 Portland riots that there be an implementation of a process to improve preparedness for multi-component response and including recommendations for FPS. Have you implemented any of those recommendations?
Yes, sir. So there's 3 recommendations. The first 2 have been implemented. The last one is a policy, a directive on our approach to public order. That policy is with the Department for Review and Signature. So that's gone through now. A lot of lessons learned out of Portland, our approach to civil disorder, the training that we've conducted to all of our employees now to redesign our approach has all been completed. We're just waiting on now the policy to be signed, and that policy will be for all of DHS, not just FPS.
Thanks. Ranking Member Titus mentioned the counter UAS, and you discussed it, and I think it's very important to have the coordination. In fact, the leadership of this committee, of the Homeland Security Committee, and the Judiciary Committee have a joint bill to extend those authorities through 28, including, if I'm not mistaken, to extend FPS authorities and expand them. And I don't want to ask you a softball question to say, can you tell us how great that is? But can you tell us how great that is? No, can you explain to this committee a little bit why FPS needs those expanded authorities and how do you use them?
So, sir, we think it's critical for our protection efforts of our federal facilities. I did mention that we have implemented a 24/7 counter UAS operation at a covered asset, a high-risk covered asset here in D.C. And every day that system is picking up drones. Typically, it's someone playing with a drone they got for the birthday or for Christmas. But there have been times when our folks have electronically mitigated those drones and brought them down and took control of those. Without that ability to do this, not only would our facilities be vulnerable, but a number of other facilities that have the authority right now to implement that, Secret Service, Coast Guard, CBP, if we all lose that authority, then I think there's a lot more vulnerabilities that we would have to deal with.
Yeah. Commissioner Dooms, has the underfunding, or how has the underfunding of the federal building fund impacted your ability to implement security standards that the ISC developed?
Thank you for that question, Ranking Member Larson. The underfunding of the federal building fund makes it difficult for us to optimize and modernize the portfolio. If we had fewer buildings, we think FPS might be able to secure those fewer buildings that are better utilized. We've been missing about $1 billion a year for the last decade. We have proposed in fiscal year 24 and 25 a fix for the federal building fund that will allow us to spend all of the revenue that came in and to accelerate the modernization of our portfolio. Over the last 4 fiscal years, we've shed 8 million square feet of space, and that's with it being underfunded. But if we were able to get this fix in the FY25 legislative proposal, we could continue to shed space on a faster basis, get higher utilization in our buildings, and frankly, give the Federal Protective Service fewer buildings that they have to actually defend and secure.
Thanks. Commissioner Klein, back to you. During the break, we chatted a little bit about the Paris Olympics coming up starting Friday, the LA Olympics in 2028. But in between, the U.S., Canada, Mexico, but mainly the U.S. is hosting the 2026 World Cup. And the way it's described is that it's a Super Bowl in every city, in every host city for like 3 straight weeks. You're talking about 85 to 90,000 people attending the event, plus maybe half of that outside each of the venues in large cities like Seattle and LA and others. Tell me it's on your radar. Tell me you're part of the planning team for the security in these cities, and that we can at least know that FPS is on top of this.
Thank you, sir. So the planning efforts continue for these events. I mean, they are all large events. Counter UAS will be instrumental. Our focus, of course, will be the federal facilities that are in the cities where those events will take place. We're planning and preparing for deployments of officers and agents to increase the protection efforts of those facilities. Just like we did last week in the RNC, all of our coordination efforts are in conjunction with the Secret Service as the lead for the NSSE type event. We make sure that we're at the command post, we're working with all the partner agencies that are there. But obviously our focus is federal facilities, but we also maintain awareness of what's going on within those locations. Planned efforts have already started, sir, and they're looking at who has the counter UAS capability to go to all these locations. If we lose that authority, then obviously we lose the ability to do counter UAS operations. But it started, the DHS Special Events Working Group is already digging into it and preparing for those events.
Fair enough. Thanks, yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Oregon, Ms. Chavez DeRemer.
Thank you. I want to first thank Chairman Perry, Chairman Graves, and this committee for their support in helping me pass 2 bills through the House this past March, the FOCUS Act and the Impact of Crime on Public Building Usage Act. The GSA's Public Building Service exists to provide safe and effective workspace for federal employees across more than 100 federal agencies at the best value for taxpayers. The Federal Oversight of Construction Use and Safety, or FOCUS Act, would make common sense reforms to the GSA's real estate practices through information sharing between agencies and Congress, consolidating unused office space, reducing real estate costs, and saving taxpayers' dollars. With the new post-pandemic world we are now living in, it is time we review why taxpayers are paying for empty federal office spaces, especially when, under this administration, there is now a work-from-home preference. Mr. Dooms, a recent tour of several federal buildings this month by my committee staff revealed how few people are in many of their federal buildings. Do you agree there's a need to review GSA real estate for consolidations and space reductions?
Thank you for that question, Congresswoman. What I'll tell you, I agree that we should be reducing the footprint and we should be optimizing and modernizing and get better utilization in our federal buildings. And I appreciate any and all efforts in that direction.
Thank you. In addition to the letter that Chairman Perry led to the GSA and FPS, my other bill that passed the House echoes the letter's concern and aims to address them. The Impact of Crime on Public Building Usage Act requires the GAO to study the impact of crime, including the use of fentanyl and other illicit drugs, on workers' utilization of these public buildings. It also requires the GSA to submit a report to Congress on the impacts and costs associated with building operations related to crime and public safety in and around those federal buildings. Mr. Maroney, you submitted testimony identified challenges that undermine FPS's productivity and oversight of contract guards at federal buildings, leading to instances of prohibited items entering buildings undetected. In this report, did you at all consider fentanyl or other illicit drugs having entered these public buildings due to the contract guard failures?
That was not a part of our study. We looked at weapons that were being brought in, but not at illicit drugs.
Mr. Dooms, has concern of increased fentanyl use, crime, and homelessness negatively impacted the safety at federal buildings? And if so, does the GSA have a concrete plan to address those concerns and keep our federal workers safe?
Appreciate that question, Congresswoman. What I'll tell you is that GSA is always concerned about the tenants that are coming into our buildings, as well as the American citizens that come to receive services in federal buildings. Earlier this year, the administrator of GSA issued a new minimum level of security for federally owned facilities, where we said if it's a GSA facility, we're going to have video security, as well as an alarm system on every building. And what I'll say is that security in these buildings is not static. It is constantly evolving, and we're working with our partners at the Federal Protective Service. So we understand that there's a need, that there's a problem, and we continue to work with the FPS, who has the primary responsibility for securing these federal buildings.
So to follow up on that, minimum level is technology replacing the contract guards?
No, it's there to complement that.
Complement, okay. Mr. Klein, I do appreciate the attention that FPS is giving to ensuring federal facilities are safe places to work as we deal with ever-changing threats. As part of these ever-changing threats, has FPS considered the rising anti-Semitic threats to federal workers from pro-Hamas sympathizers or possibly peer-to-peer anti-Semitic threats to the individual safety?
Thank you, ma'am. So we have a lot of demonstrations at federal facilities. FPS was built in 1971 as part of GSA due to the large-scale demonstrations that were taking place in our country at that time. We deal with demonstrators on a daily basis. It's a First Amendment protected activity. Normally, outside of DC, the federal facility with the big flag in front represents the United States government, and that's where people tend to demonstrate. We've had a 14% increase in demonstrations from last year to this year. Since October 7th, 652 demonstrations at our FPS protected facilities. Some have included some level of violence, graffiti, breaking some windows, some attempted arsons, but all the demonstrations we approach the same way. It doesn't matter the topic, it doesn't matter the issue. We are there to protect the federal facilities to ensure that the employees can come and go. We have had some instances in the last 6 months where the demonstrators were blocking entrances, and we coordinated with the tenants in the building to make avenues of exit if they needed to leave, but we just primarily just sheltered the building in place for an hour until the demonstration was over. It's something we focus on every day. We have, this week here in DC, you know what's occurring tomorrow, the joint session of Congress. We have about 100 of our law enforcement officers here in town because federal facilities are on each side of the Capitol that we're responsible for protecting, and we want to make sure that the demonstrations don't get out of hand. We did work with the federal tenants in those buildings and recommended maximum telework, not to bring people in to be confronted.
Thank you, Mr. Klein. I'm sorry, I see my time has gone past, so with that, I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Dooms, we continue to miss your excellent work as a staffer on Capitol Hill, so welcome. In November 2023, GSA announced plans to dispose of 23 properties, including 2 in the District of Columbia, the Daniel Webster School and the DHS Nebraska Avenue Complex. In April 2024, GSA announced plans to dispose of the Liberty Loan Building in DC. What is the status of those dispositions?
Thank you, Congresswoman. What I want to give an update to is on the Webster School, the Liberty Loan Building, as well as the Nebraska Avenue Complex, because we've heard the imperative from this committee to move forward on disposing of underutilized property. So in terms of the Webster School, that facility has already been reported excess. Federal screening and the McKinney-Vento homeless assistance screening have already taken place. Right now, we're screening for a possible public benefit conveyance. We expect that those application deadlines for those uses are on August 15th and August 16th. If there is no application in that time frame, we will move forward on a private sale. We've worked closely with the Department of Homeland Security in order to put in some security covenants that will run with the land, but that disposal is moving forward. In terms of the Liberty Loan Building, that asset has also been reported excess, and right now we are engaged in due diligence activities such as environmental and title work. In March of 2025, we expect the employees in that building to be moved out of that building to a different location, and after those due diligence activities are finished, the federal screening will commence, and we will move forward that on a private sale as well. In regards to the Nebraska Avenue Complex, this is where we're looking for some help from Congress. We are trying to finish the consolidation of the Department of Homeland Security at the West Campus. Right now, there's one agency component left on the Nebraska Avenue Complex, the Intelligence and Analysis Unit. We're working very closely with the Department of Homeland Security to put together a housing plan for that agency. While we're waiting for that so that we can move that agency off the Nebraska Avenue Complex, I've directed the Assistant Commissioner of Dispositions to begin work with the District of Columbia to start the small area planning necessary for the Nebraska Avenue Complex, because we think that's going to generate the best return for taxpayers if the District of Columbia has spoken loudly and definitively about what the use is for the Nebraska Avenue Complex, and therefore generating a greater return for taxpayers. So all 3 of those disposals are moving forward, but the Webster School is the furthest along. then Liberty Loan, and we are planning for the Nebraska Avenue complex disposal.
Thank you for that statement. Given that the Webster School has been vacant since the 1980s, Chairman Perry and I introduced a bill to direct GSA to dispose of the property by December 31st, 2025. The House passed the bill. The Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works passed the bill, and it is now pending on the Senate calendar. I hope the Senate will pass it soon. I thank the subcommittee for holding this critical hearing on protecting federal employees and federal buildings. I want to take a step back to discuss balancing security and public access to public property in a democracy. Since 2000, I have introduced the United States Commission on an Open Society with Security Act, which would create a commission to investigate how we can maintain public access to public property while actively responding to substantial security threats. The impetus for this bill was the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995. Its importance grew after the terrorist attacks on September the 11th, 2001, and has reached peak urgency since the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. The succession of tragic events endured by our nation has led to a series of sweeping security increases that are deemed both necessary and temporary in the moment, but create lasting security infrastructure and practices that are difficult to dismantle on our open democratic society. What we thought would be temporary infringements on our open society have turned into permanent restrictions on how citizens interact with each other and our democratic institutions. We must acknowledge and accept that we have entered an era of constant domestic and institutional threats, requiring ever higher levels of security for our people in public spaces. However, because emergencies typically dictate security decisions, essential decisions on the proper balance between security, individual rights, and freedoms enjoyed in an open society have been repeatedly deferred. My bill would ensure that these long overdue discussions take place in a public forum with experts drawn from across the spectrum. To date, security planning has been delegated almost exclusively to security intelligence, and military experts. Although their input is indispensable, they cannot be expected to consider matters outside their expertise. To strike a better balance that gives sufficient importance to our democratic traditions, we must invite experts from diverse fields to do the same. Therefore, the commission would be composed not only of security, intelligence, and military experts, but also experts from such fields as business, architecture, technology, law, city planning, art, engineering, philosophy, history, sociology, and psychology. I urge the committee to take up this bill, and I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentlelady as I channel my inner Garrett Graves and reasonableness, and now the chair recognizes the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Ezell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for having this hearing today for us, and thank you for all for being here today. This hearing comes at a very crucial time as we deal with the assassination attempt on former President Trump. Securing our federal buildings is paramount. The Federal Protection Service must have the capability to respond and make decisions in the interest of security, and these decisions cannot be based on political bias. When I was a sheriff and an officer, recruiting, retention, and training was always at the top of my mind. However, these issues have seemed to have gotten only worse here over the last few years. The manpower challenges the FPS is facing, coupled with the difficulties faced by vacant buildings, the rise of homelessness and drug abuse is deeply concerning. That's why I sent a letter along with Subcommittee Chairman Perry and Congresswoman Chavez DeRemer expressing concern and demanding answers to this. Director Klein you stated in response to the letter, FPS experienced a 138% increase in demonstrations and an overall 24% increase in assault on government employees. If you could expand on this a little bit, and how has this impacted the health and safety of our law enforcement personnel and protective security officers since 2020?
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the question. So first, the protective security officers, the number of increased assaults that we've indicated, 85 to 90% of those are on either our uniformed police officers or our contract protective security officers. And it typically occurs at an entrance or at a screening station when someone's just not happy with what's going on there, or they're not happy with a benefit that was either denied or reduced by a government agency. Recruiting and retention is huge for us. We're competing in the same market as everyone else. I took over as the director a year and a half ago. We had almost 500 vacancies. We're down to 409 vacancies today, and we continue to chip away at this. We have, by the end of next month, we'll have an additional 67 new employees on board. We have 5 new police officer training classes scheduled for next year. We just offered 45 tentative job offers at the DHS job fair out in Dulles a couple weeks ago. And based on the shortage of staff that I have, we recently implemented a retention incentive to keep our current workforce with us until we get through the entire election cycle. You've seen what type of activity we have. Right. We've got an election coming up, we've got a certification, we've got an inauguration. I need to keep as many people as I can on board until I can fill those current vacancies, and then we can get rid of the retention incentive.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I was even more surprised to learn that despite your agency's recommendations to improve security, they often go ignored. In the time that we live in, we cannot afford to have lax security as which we head towards November. In response, I, along with my colleague from Louisiana, Troy Carter, introduced the Federal Protection Service Reform Act, which requires each agency to provide a written reason as to why they did not implement FPS recommendations. Mr. Klein, do you believe that receiving similar responses will help you better protect your federal buildings?
Thank you, Congressman. Absolutely. Your introduction of your bill, the Senate side introduction of a similar companion bill, GSA's recent order requiring the implementation of the video surveillance systems and the intrusion detection systems at GSA-owned facilities, and then the new ISC executive order is really going to strengthen our position and strengthen the requirement for those agencies to fund the implementation of those countermeasures.
Thank you. Mr. Baroni, you stated in your testimony during your covert testing approximately 50% of prohibited items in federal buildings went undetected by FPS. Even so, 80% of the time, FPS blamed a human factor as the cause. While FPS has implemented several changes since this test, what do you think accounts for contract guards missing this inexcusably large percentage of hazards?
So there could be a number of reasons. Human factor is a pretty broad term. That could mean the person has been trained appropriately, but they just didn't carry out the techniques like they should have. It could mean there's an equipment issue. It could mean they didn't report properly in the system, and so the data is not entirely correct. So what's important there is for FPS to take deliberate actions, as they've already started to do, to figure out what are these issues, what are the root causes of items getting through at this rate, and then taking actions to address those specific issues. So the data is a first step. The next step is to figure out what are the root causes.
Very good. Do you think hiring more federal agents rather than contracting guards will help with the accountability issue? Mr. Klein?
I'm sorry, the beginning of your question?
Yeah. I have been responsible in my lifetime as a sheriff and as a chief of police of being in charge of making sure a building was secure. I always had full-time state-certified law enforcement officers under my control and my staff. Nothing against security officers, but a lot of times these security officers do not have arrest authority like a police officer or a certified officer. So my concern is that we have officers in place to protect a building or whatever it may be. They don't have arrest authority. So that poses another issue. I would, and I know I'm kind of talking a little bit about my feelings about this, but it's very important that we start looking at full-time certified officers to maybe transition into these part-time positions so that they can have the full authority that they need to get the job done. So you can just talk about that a minute.
Certainly, sir. That's a discussion we've had in the past. We mentioned before our contract PSOs. If another guard company takes another contract and they're offering 50 cents more per hour or $1 more per hour, then we're probably going to lose that person to go to the other. It's a higher paying job. So we have, first we've got some legislation we've pursued that would give our protective security officers a little bit more of our authority, our federal authority. Right now, you're correct, so they can only detain. They have the authority to detain someone, not arrest them. The legislative proposal that we put forward would allow a couple of things. First, it would allow us to cross state lines with those PSOs. So a good example is Hurricane or Superstorm Sandy in New York. We needed to bring in more PSOs to protect FEMA sites where they were bringing in equipment. We wanted to bring them in from Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, into New York. We had to get approval from the State Attorney General's office to waive that licensing requirement to bring them in as armed guards. This legislative proposal we've submitted would allow us to delegate some federal authority, so we don't have to go and ask for approval to cross state lines. Secondarily, this new legislative proposal will also allow the protective security officer to pursue an active shooter. Right now, they're licensed by the state. They can man a post. That's their duty assignment. In theory, they don't have the ability to run and respond to an active shooter. They would. We all know that no one's going to stand by while someone's getting shot. But this new authority will allow us to train them on offensive tactics to go and pursue an active shooter event. But I agree with you, sir. We have looked at and continue to look at the possibility, do we federalize some of this, some of the PSO functions? It's a big program, but we are considering what next steps to take to make it better.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
The gentleman's time plus an additional 3 minutes and 41 seconds have expired. I want to thank you all for being here today. Mr. Maroney, I appreciate the work that the GAO has done to help identify some of these concerns to the Congress. I'm curious about a few things. You all have done similar work at airports, and as you know, there are airports that have private contract security. Have you seen similar concerns or failures at airports at a rate that may exceed TSA, meaning private contractors failing at a higher rate than TSA?
So we certainly have done work at the TSA. I'm not your best expert on that, but I can get that
information. Tell you what, we'll follow up with a question for the record there.
Yeah.
So you're not here to necessarily say that the contracting officers are the problem then?
Right.
Okay. Let me ask you this question. How many failures would it take for us to have a potentially catastrophic incident?
Well, one failure could potentially
That's
do
right,
it.
one failure. And what you evaluated was nearly a 50% failure rate. So another question, and I'm not a math whiz, but as I recall, there was an assessment that was done by, I believe, GSA, and Mr. Dooms can correct me, that found that 17 of 24 federal buildings in the Washington, D.C. area had occupancy rates of lower than 25%, some as low as 9%. So let me say it again, I'm not a math whiz, but if we actually consolidated the federal space and shrunk the footprint that was required to be secure, would it be easier to better protect a smaller footprint?
It would certainly cost less, and it potentially, if you have a smaller amount of facilities to do, the shortage issues that Director Klein have discussed might be less of an issue.
Mr. Klein, would you agree with that?
I would agree, sir.
Okay, so just want to make note that that's something that we need to be more aggressive about, in addition, obviously, to helping you fill your vacancies. Mr. Klein, have you seen any trends where the private contractors are less successful at providing security compared to your own officers?
No, sir. So our law enforcement officers don't do the screening operations, X-ray mag, visitor check. It's done by the contract PSOs. Our responsibility is to oversee that and to conduct on-the-job training, conduct compliance of contract stuff.
Okay, let me ask you to probably go a little bit outside of your scope then. What about CSOs for some of the federal courts? Have you seen where the federal employees that are working for the Marshal Service have a higher rate of success compared to the private contractors? And if you don't know, that's a fine answer.
I don't know, sir.
Okay. I just asked Mr. Maroney and Mr. Klein if you could both look into that question and follow back up with us as well. Mr. Maroney, that would be the second one for you. And then lastly, Mr. Klein, or lastly for Mr. Klein, I assume that you're the contractor to these private security companies. Is that correct?
They are on contract from the Federal Protective
Okay.
Services.
Is there a performance, any type of performance requirement to where taxpayers would actually save money as a result of these folks not doing their job?
Yes, sir. So when a PSO fails a covert test, we are deducting the hours that PSO has stood that post from the payment to the vendor. It takes a while to get that process. There's a lot of hands involved in that pot. And it's same with an open post. The chairman mentioned Social Security, Customer Service Centers, and IRS, Tax Assistance Centers. When the vendor fails to post a PSO at that post, which is called an open post, we don't pay the vendor for those hours that it was left open.
So I just want to make sure I understand before you get too far down. So number one, you're not paying them during the periods when they're not there, which makes sense, but then you're also saying that you're not paying them during the periods when they failed.
When they failed, yes, sir.
Okay, so, but you're not doing anything to extrapolate out. For example, Mr. Maroney's team found that nearly 50% of the time these folks are failing. So you're not extrapolating that out and saying we're cutting half of your funding, correct?
That's correct. So because it's multiple contracts that were in place when the GAO, and same with us, when we do our...
You do see the concern that I'm highlighting, though.
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Okay. I do think that we need to be thinking about a remedy there because there needs to be a performance. If people aren't performing, they shouldn't be paid. And you know, all the people that work on our team, they know that. I say it every week. We don't pay them to sit there. We pay them to perform. I think that's really important because if they're failing 50% of the time when his teams are testing them, they're probably failing 50% of the time.
Yes, sir.
And I think we need to look at that. Mr. Dooms, it's good to see you again. We just need to get you a permanent seat here with a permanent nameplate. I hope you and your family are doing well. Again, good to see you again. Back to our dialogue about the footprint and just it would be easier to secure a smaller footprint, especially if it's not being needed, because that way we save taxpayer money on the excessive space. We also can help Mr. Klein secure a smaller space by allowing him to focus on what truly needs to be protected as opposed to vacant office buildings. Would you concur that makes sense?
Congressman, I agree. And that's why in FY25, we made a request for a $425 million space optimization program where we would be able, for the first time ever, front the cost of furniture, fixtures, and equipment, and the move costs, so we can move agencies out of buildings where they aren't fully utilizing into a building where we can get a higher level of utilization rate, which is why it's so important that we get full funding on the federal building fund. We've done a pretty decent job of reducing the footprint over the last 4 fiscal years. We've gotten rid of 8 million square feet. We could do more if we have the money.
Mr. Dooms, you can understand, I'm sure, my initial reaction when you said you needed money to save space. I'm thinking that seems a little bit backwards and that it seems like saving space would actually result in cost savings. Can you help me understand if we were to invest $425 million, what type of cost savings we would see over what period, just a rough order of magnitude?
I believe we can save, I think the number is $6 billion over 10 years.
$6 billion over 10? If we, and again, ballpark, I'm not going to hold you to it, but just a ballpark range?
I'll follow up with the
Okay,
precise numbers.
great. I'd appreciate that.
But
Anything else?
just for clarification, we can not only sell buildings, move people out of buildings where they're underutilized, we can turn around and sell those buildings. And we've got a pretty good track record. We put up 25 buildings for sale November 2023, or announced that we were moving them through the disposition process. We've got a great track record with the Volpe project, where we disposed of 10 acres and built on the other 4 acres and used the value there. And we're looking for other projects like that across the nation. So we're going to have to spend money in order to save money, but we have the track record and we can provide you more details.
The rough order of magnitude of savings that you noted seems like would be more than worth it, and I look forward to receiving your follow-up on that. Last question, Mr. Dunes, if there's an agency I don't like, could I get you to just get rid of their space, and then that way we can deal with them that way? Would that work?
I can't recommend that course of action.
Thank you, Mr. Dooms. I want to thank Ranking Member Titus's patience as I went a little overboard, as well as a couple of others. Ms. Titus, Ranking Member Titus, do you have any follow-up or closing? Okay, great. So I yield back, and I don't think there are any further questions from the subcommittee. And so that does conclude our hearing for today. I'd like to thank each of the witnesses. As you know, there are, the record remains open. There are some questions for the record that we have dialogued here, as well as others that will be submitted, but I appreciate you being here today, and the subcommittee stands adjourned.